So the basic idea of this particular fund is to connect arts and culture organisations with technology companies, but critically in a way that other arts and culture organisations that are not participating in the fund directly can learn. And that's where the research and development sort of focus lies. Specifically, as you know from the website and the call, we're inviting you, arts and culture organisations, to apply for funds which will test propositions, so that language being really quite central to the fund, testing propositions on how new technologies can be used to broaden, widen and deepen audience engagement and or explore new business models. We created this fund, as I was saying earlier, because certainly from my side, we've perceived there's been a gap in funding streams for arts and culture organisations who want to experiment in this specific area of new engagement and business models. It's some feedback that going back to the work with the National Theatre, my sort of feeling is that that piece of R&D and the research insights that we gained from that project would not have been done were I not having access to a budget within NESTA to do it. My sense was that there needs to be funding streams to allow, somewhere in the funding landscape, there needs to be some space for organisations to experiment. Critically, of course, it's that we're in the arts and cultural sector. There's huge amounts of experimentation that one sees, but when one does see it in the area of using technologies to broaden and deepen audience engagement and/or explore new business models, the insights from those experiments are typically closed and kept in the minds of those people that were lucky enough to participate in that experiment. There's no tradition, no open research and development tradition of sharing those insights. So that's really what we're testing with this sort of fund, the idea that maybe we can, through provision of funding and critically research and development expertise, and this is where the input of the research councils is so key to the idea, that we can maybe try and take a step at least in the right direction. So following an intensive period of scoping, some of which some of you I know participated, this included incidentally a series of semi-structured interviews with arts and culture organisations. We wanted to do formal semi-structured interviews, and therefore that placed a limit on how much we could afford to do, so apologies for those that were not invited to participate in those interviews. We had a series of meetings at NESTA and the Arts Council, and also an open consultation using Google Moderator on what the fund's priority areas should be. And the results of that, which we published on our website alongside the call, and hopefully you've seen, settled on 6 broad thematic areas. And these are the areas that the fund will focus on: social media and user-generated content, distribution, mobile and gaming, data and archive, education and learning, and resources. So we're looking to support projects, going back to this R&D theme, that bring important knowledge and learning to benefit the arts and cultural sector as a whole. So that means we're looking for proposals that develop insights and critically rigorous evidence that other organisations will find useful. And because knowledge is right at the heart of the fund, we've purposely developed it as an R&D fund in the way that I was describing. Now, I'm under no illusions here about concepts like research and development. There is no, if one was to look at the official reference guides of what research and development means, there'll be a lot of talk about the resolution of scientific and technological uncertainty, and very little discussion on audience engagement and business models, and certainly the arts. So mindful of the fact this is a very immature and poorly researched area. But again, so one of the sort of ambitions, really, I suppose, of this fund is to try and get a better understanding about what research and development activities actually are in the arts and cultural sector. So this is very much the frame within which I and NESTA have been approaching this particular fund. So critically, each proposal needs to have a clear proposition that the project will rigorously test. Now, the knowledge created must be valuable to all arts and culture organisations, like I said, but another novelty in this fund, and we'll try it out to see if it will work, is that we've deliberately not been prescriptive on where that knowledge is created. So an implication of that is that the eligibility criteria, and I'll come to this, are much more open than is typically associated with funding for the arts and cultural sector. So, for example, commercial creative businesses can also apply to this fund, so long as the proposition that they're testing demonstrably promises to generate knowledge that the arts and culture sector needs to innovate. And I'll come back, as I say, to what these eligibility criteria are in a few moments. But again, we're hoping that the slack that the arts and cultural sector will give us here is that we're really testing, because you can imagine this raises all sorts of issues when one focuses the fund on the knowledge that's created rather than the site or the sector or the type of organisation where it's created. And we're mindful of the fact this is a new way of funding, and this is why we really want to learn about how this process works, as well as the projects themselves that we're funding. So the R&D fund itself is small. NESTA sort of is in the business of prototyping and trialling, so that suits me fine. It's a way of managing some of the risks that arise from when you're trying to do something new. £500,000 will go to arts and cultural organisations in total. I should say that the research dimension, the R&D dimension, which I'll come back to, is being funded separately to this. That's in addition to the 500,000. The 500,000 is what will go out to arts and cultural organisations. It's difficult to anticipate how many projects will support, because we haven't done a fund like this before. We might expect to fund between, say, 5 and 10 projects, but we're waiting to see what the applications we receive will mean before we can decide that. So that really is our guess, but we appreciate the need to share with you what we anticipate, because that will give you some guidance about what the scale of the funds that may be available. There's a limit of £100,000 that we'll be distributing to any individual project, and again, that's to give some parameters on as you sort of think about your applications. Now, although the R&D fund is small, we're hoping that the impact on the sector from these projects will be big. And depending on its success, our R&D fund may serve, as both Anthony and Peter have been alluding to earlier, it will essentially serve as a pilot for how the Arts Council will run its R&D strand of its wider digital innovation programme. So another hope we have is that we'll fund a range of innovation projects through the fund, incremental as well as more radical innovations, smaller as well as larger projects, spread by art and cultural form as well as region. But to ensure that we can support the strongest projects that which meet the programme objectives, we're deliberately not allocating the funds according to the size of the projects, the art or cultural forms, or the specific geographical location. So we've not divvied up the £500,000 according to region, for example, but I want to be clear that from the point of view of a funder or a supporter, clearly there's a sense in which a spread is likely to generate results that are of more interest to the wider arts and culture sector. But we're not imposing these sorts of we're not splitting that £500,000 according to those criteria. So how does it work? At the heart of the fund is the belief, and we hope this comes across in the call on our website, that partnership is absolutely key for innovation in the arts and cultural sector. Of course, that's a prior as well. I mean, that's not an evidenced proposition, but that's a prior that we as funding partners will share. We are asking, therefore, arts and cultural organisations to formally seek a technology partner which they can collaborate with. Applications will be led by arts and cultural organisations. You'll be the ones that, or those of you that are representing arts and cultural organisations, you'll be the ones that directly be making the applications and you'll be receiving the grants. But we need to know which technology providers you'll be working with. As well as an opportunity for arts and cultural organisations, I hope that the technology companies here will see this as a great opportunity to better understand the opportunities and challenges through actual practical projects of working in the arts and cultural sector, and critically in a sheltered space, because this is an R&D fund. This is about experimentation. So an R&D result project which gives the answer no to a testable proposition is as of interest to us, if the proposition is relevant to the arts and culture sector, as the answer yes. And we're hoping that space, because it will sort of encourage some creative applications. The second aspect of this partnership is between arts and cultural organisations themselves, not least in the current funding climate, but more fundamentally, we're encouraging organisations which are more digitally advanced to collaborate in their bids with those that are less experienced. And certainly when we were scoping this project, there was an absolute open door we found from those organisations which are digitally more experienced to want to work and embracing the idea of working with the wider arts and culture sector. The third aspect of this partnership is with researchers, and perhaps that's the most novel element of the fund. Working with the AHRC, we'll be teaming up researchers with each project that we're supporting through the R&D fund. And I should be clear here, because I think there's been perhaps some confusion in the past on this. Arts and cultural organisations do not need to identify researchers or build in research proposals into your applications. We're not sort of expecting arts and culture organisations to double up as researchers when they're making their applications. The critical thing we're encouraging you to focus on is a testable proposition that's relevant to the arts and culture sector, a burning question that you want the answer to, that you think other arts and culture organisations want the answer to too. It's our role, and the Arts and Humanities Research Council's role, to bring in the research and development expertise and to do it in a way that is collaborative and that you own, that can provide those services. So just to be clear here, you don't have to sort of double up as a researcher and provide some sort of experimental methodology in your proposals, but you do need to think hard about propositions, why your project can shed rigorous insights into propositions that are of importance to the wider sector. So in summary, find a technology partner to work with and submit your proposal. We will team up researchers for successful projects with you. You'll work together to deliver the R&D project. All the R&D projects supported by the fund must be completed by October 2012, which is again a very demanding timeline, we recognise, but as a pilot, that's what we're working with. I should say, of course, and again, this is another area where there's potential for confusion, the research and development activity that we're funding must be completed by October 2012, but that research and development activity may be part of a wider project initiative, which of course continues beyond that. So we'll be looking to publish and make widely available the results of the R&D projects, because going back to what I said earlier, this is about knowledge for the wider arts and culture sector. We'll be looking to do that, publish any data, research findings at the earliest opportunity, and depending of course on the projects and their timelines, we'll be looking to sort of build on a project by project basis dissemination timetables which are sensitive to the projects that we're supporting. I'd like to very quickly, and I think I've got 3 or 4 minutes, end by just maybe going through a schematic that we put together, which we found helpful in summarising, as it were, the process. We've obviously gone through a process of programme scoping already and identifying the themes. We've issued a call for arts and culture organisations, which is what we're here to discuss. There's a parallel call that we've issued, a call for expression of interest from researchers, but you needn't concern yourself with that. We're having these digital days. This is the second of 5 digital days we've got planned for the summer. We want to select a portfolio of projects, as I said, but we want to support the best projects essentially. But ideally, this would be a spread. We will have a process whereby selected project teams will have an opportunity to explore how propositions can be tested with the researchers that are interested in working with you. The projects will begin, and then ultimately we want some inspiring knowledge, some inspiring case studies, which akin to what we think happened with National Theatre Live, which will be taken up and we'll sort of enter into the wider discourse. The timetable you've already seen, so I won't, unless Angela you think I need to, I won't go through that again. If there are any, I'll just hold it on there as I'm talking for the next few seconds so you can see it on the slide, but you should have all this information. As successful arts and cultural organisations will work closely with the research teams. So the key thing here, this isn't ex post evaluation, this is R&D, this is research as an integral part of the experimentation. So it's important for us that the projects will not actually commence, or at least the R&D activity will not commence before the middle of October, 15th of October, because that's the stage at which we feel we'll be able to have recruited research teams that were appropriate. In terms of the criteria for arts and culture organisations applying for this, there are four broad sort of categories. The first set of criteria around the proposition itself. So going back to what I said earlier, how testable it is, how innovative is it, how important is testing this particular proposition, this digital proposition for the wider sector. So that's one set of criteria, the proposition. Secondly, about the project research and learning and wider impact. How well suited is this project to testing the digital proposition? What potential is there to deliver data and research and findings that will be of interest to the wider sector, etc. The third sort of set of criteria is under the banner of collaboration. I think I spent quite a lot of time talking about partnership, and the call does this as well. So you can imagine there are a number of criteria around how collaborative is this proposal. And then last but not least, a set of criteria around project delivery. I mean, fundamentally, not least because of the tight timelines, how well does this application demonstrate the ability to deliver the project and the things that you would expect. And again, if there are any specific questions about these criteria, then I and Angela are around later on. So, as I said, I mean, if you've got any particular questions, I don't know, probably haven't got time to take it right this second. We've got a session now, so I'll probably, I think at this stage, rejoin the panel. Thank you.